both Palestinian and American. She was a Christian among her largely Muslim fellow Palestinians. In this, she embodied the multiculturalism that has always characterized Palestine.
I have to say that the playbook that is being used today in Ukraine, it's literally the same thing that have been done in Syria.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. We begin with a memorial to Shireen Abu Akleh in the Connecticut town of New Milford.
Good morning, I'm Jenin. We're all here today to remember Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. She was wearing a prominently marked press jacket and helmet when she was shot dead by an Israeli sniper on May 11th in the city of Jenin in occupied Palestine. She was 51. So we're here to mourn her death and to celebrate her life. Shireen reported for Al Jazeera for 25 years. She was widely respected and beloved across the Arab world, especially. In Arabic, Shireen means sweet, gentle. From all we know, she was sweet, kind, and funny. She was also a great role model for other women, especially Arab women, and for me. Shireen was both Palestinian and American. She was a Christian among her largely Muslim fellow Palestinians. In this, she embodied the multiculturalism that has always characterized Palestine, despite Israeli attempts to make it something that it's not and never has been, exclusively Jewish. Above all, Shireen was dedicated to reporting these truths. The truth of the brutality of Israel's illegal military occupation of 55 years, the truth of the Palestinian Nakba, the catastrophe, when the majority Christian and Muslim native Palestinians were ethnically cleansed from their homes by Israelis in 1947 to 1949. The truth of Israeli apartheid over all of Israel-Palestine, as documented by 5 human rights groups, including Israel's own Beit Tselem, Human Rights Watch, and Amnesty International. Shireen was killed for her unrelenting reporting of these truths. In that, she joins at least 46 other Palestinian journalists who've been killed by Israel since the second Palestinian uprising or intifada in 2000. 46 Palestinian journalists have been killed for doing their work. Shireen's witness challenges us, her fellow Americans, to also speak the truth about our government's complicity in the terrors and injustice of Israeli occupation and apartheid. We give Israel $3.8 billion of our hard-earned tax money. We protect Israel from any condemnation at the UN Security Council for its human rights violations. Israel is our cop on the beat, as Noam Chomsky would say. Israel buys our weapons with much of the money that we give them, and then they test them out on various populations. As I think about Shireen's murder, it's hard not to think about the amazing and justifiable support we're giving to Ukrainians, just over here, you can see that, for resisting Russian aggression. Why not the same for Palestinians who are resisting dispossession, mostly peacefully, mostly by just trying to stay on their land? Shireen constantly shone a light on the reality of the U.S.-Israel special relationship, that we share the same national formative acts of ethnic cleansing and settler colonialism, and we share denial of these histories. So, like Palestinian itself, Shireen is a casualty of settler colonialism. To bring it closer to home these days, Israel's soldiers killing unarmed Palestinians is no different from American policemen killing unarmed African Americans. Palestinians because they're not Jews, blacks because they're not white. Ultimately, Shireen's murder as a journalist challenges all to stand up for freedom of the press everywhere. Her life challenges me. I've witnessed in Gaza, in Palestine, and in Lebanon as an anthropologist and clinical psychologist, all that she writes about. So I'm challenged not to turn away, and I hope you all won't either. May she rest in peace.
Some thoughts here today at the memorial service for Shireen Abu Akleh, an American citizen, Palestinian, who did a superb job when she did reporting on what was happening to her people. I don't want to repeat things, maybe bring up a few new things. In addition to the murder of this woman, who was with other journalists who had talked to Israeli soldiers, who were waiting to report on an Israeli raid in Jenin. She's killed by a sniper, and her funeral cortege is attacked. There's video of this. This heavily armed Israeli police attacked the people bringing her casket from the church. She was a Catholic woman. And they almost knocked the casket to the ground. Unfortunately, this is not completely rare, because just a couple days later, Walid Sharif, who was killed in the Al-Aqsa compound, his funeral cortege was also attacked. Around the time that Israel announced that it would not investigate the Abu Akleh killing, CNN came out with a forensic analysis that concluded that Israeli troops were most likely the source of the shot that killed Shireen Abu Akleh. This is a screenshot from their video. We added a red arrow to show where the Palestinian defenders of Jenin were standing, as the video itself showed later. Shireen was obviously not killed in any crossfire. We link to the CNN coverage in the Palestine-Israel archive on thestruggle.org. Some 57 members of Congress, including Hayes of Connecticut, called for a U.S. investigation of Abu Akleh's killing. After a week, there's been no response to the legislators from the State Department or the White House. Nooran Alhamdan, a Georgetown graduate of their School of Foreign Service, snubbed Secretary of State Blinken, who had just given the commencement speech, angry at U.S. indifference to the murder of Abu Akleh. She would not accept Blinken's hand and bravely told him, "We know the truth." And Tha'er Shana displayed a Palestinian flag and Shireen's picture after finishing a marathon in Cleveland. A team in Chile displayed this banner: "You know, we don't actually need any investigation of the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh. We know what Israel does. What we need is more BDS. What we need is for your members of Congress to stop showering Israel with billions in our tax money." A final note on Palestine. On May 26th, a Pew Research report showed that among young Americans, support for Palestinians was just as much as support for Israelis. That's quite a change. Activism and journalism have made that possible. If only the politicians would notice. We link to the Pew study at thestruggle.org. To Marc Nelson's latest human rights drawings and paintings. This is a photo of Fatima al-Masri, the Palestinian infant from Gaza who died because the Israelis wouldn't let her get treatment in Jerusalem. This is Marc Nelson's drawing indicting the killers. The blue-green is a common antiseptic used in Ukraine, this for a child. An injured fighter in the Mariupol steel mill. A casualty on a Mariupol street. The Tadamur massacre in Syria. Remembering the Hula massacre in Syria. Rania al-Abbasi, taken by Assadists with her entire family in 2012. 2 men released recently by the Assadists. Mazen al-Hamad, a dear friend of Marc's, missing in Syria for over 820 days. And George Floyd. Ukraine. This is what Putin's men did to the House of Culture in a town called Lozava in the Kharkiv region. Here's a Ukrainian flag flying on May 20th. It's no big deal unless you know that it's flying in occupied Kherson. Ukrainian partisans put it up. It reminds me of how in 1941, Manolis Glezos and Laki Santos climbed the Acropolis in Greece and took down the Nazi flag, and how Bree Newsom Bass took down the Confederate flag in 2015 in South Carolina.
I was born and raised in Ukraine. I came here when I was over 30 years old, and we found a new home here.
Very good.
And we really enjoy the community we're living in, the culture, the country who accepted us as our own, and it's a new home.
So here the invasion started February 24th, so it's almost 3 months.
Yes.
How do you feel now?
80 something days, yes. Now it's a little settling. I believe it's just only ashes left inside, because in the beginning everything was burning. All my heart was just on fire. But now everything, like whatever left inside, coming down, I mean, for the reason because all those shock and terror and sorrow and anger, I mean, we put in something which we put, fundraising in this part of Connecticut. And a lot of people show so much support, and that warms my heart, and we did our part in supporting. We donating money to Ukrainian Red Cross, to World Central Kitchen, to National Bank of Ukraine to support military, and that is our mission here. Hi, sweetheart, how are you doing?
Good. Hi. How are you?
Good, thank you. Like I said, it still hurts, but it hurts in the way like, what else I can do? We put another option for fundraising money. We start with this one, with a little pin, which translate in over $30,000 went already to Ukraine. So now we have another ideas. We keep thinking of what else we can do.
Well, thank you very much for this interview.
Oh, absolutely.
Upcoming in Danbury, Connecticut, a vote on whether to build an additional high school in a city with one very overcrowded high school. From promoting Enduring Peace's program on Ukraine and Syria, Nidal Betare. He's a Palestinian refugee who was born in Damascus and raised in Yarmouk camp. He lived there until December 2011. He is now based in Washington, D.C., where he works as a senior programs manager at People Demand Change. He's written several important articles on the Syrian uprising and its cruel repression. Nidal Betare.
Thank you, Stanley, and thank you, Alex. And actually, I would like to start from almost where Alex closed his presentation. And thank you for this information, Alex. Especially when Alex was talking about the Orange Revolution and the revolution and of dignity. I would like to say that the colored revolutions, as it was called, it inspired our generation in Syria. I was born in 1979. It was still during the Soviet Union era, and in 2000, when the regime, or when Bashar al-Assad came to power, things like we were promised a lot of to be given a lot of freedom and to open the civil society and etc. And then the colored revolution in Eastern Europe started. And it impacted our generation. We were in our 20s back then, to an extent that I still remember how many people, how many of my friends were taken by the security service from the university and were jailed actually from 2005, 2006 until 2011 when the Syrian revolution erupted. And one of the stories that I will never ever forget, that it's really known that the revolutions in Eastern Europe back in the beginning 2000s inspired basically and mainly the democratic revolution or the Arab Revolution, as it's called in Lebanon. And I still remember I was sitting with one of my friends in the university, and we were discussing the revolution and the protest in Lebanon. And next day he did not come to the university. He was taken by the security service or the secret service. And this, I think, maybe this is one of the main nostalgic memories for me and for many of my peers about Ukraine. And maybe there is, on the other hand, I know that Ukraine was one of the most, one of the two essential states in the Soviet Union, but also in Syria, we also have our share from the Soviet Union as well. Syria was part of the socialist camp or the socialist world starting from 1960s until the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I have to say that we have lived through the 1948 George Orwell's novel, you know. The structure of the Syrian state was structured and planned in Moscow and in Eastern Germany back then. The security services, all of them, were trained by the Soviet Union and Eastern Germany. When the Soviet Union collapsed, we went through the same suffering and the same struggle to get rid of this dictatorship and authoritarianism that was that was the result of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Fast forward to the Syrian revolution. Between 2011 and 2015, the Russians were not that engaged in Syria that much. I have also to say that until today, some security branches in Syria, the heads or the leaders of these security branches, they get hired in Moscow before and approved before they sit on their chairs in Damascus. So Russians were never ever away from Syria. And like there is a say that people use, especially who served in the army, they used to say, because in the Syrian army, it's a Russian army actually, and there were a lot of experts who come to Syria and teach and train the Syrian officers. Syrian officers, a lot of them they learn, or they are being taught until today the Russian language as a second language in the Syrian army. So they were taught, one of the things they were taught by Russians, that in Russia we say, this is what they say, in Russia we say, if you want to control the Middle East, you have to put your keys in Damascus. And this is like one of the theories that was embedded in the Syrian army ideology and beliefs. However, fast forward to 2015, the Russians came to Syria militarily and started their engagement military in Syria. I have to say that the playbook that is being used today in Ukraine, it's literally the same thing that have been done in Syria. Aleppo, invading southern Syria, trying to play. I will give you this approach, like an approach. Maybe it's different than Ukraine, but it shows you the approach of the way that Russians think. Russians came to Ukraine and they were like, they have all these theories about the Russian-speaking people in certain areas. In Syria, they have been bringing people from Muslim people from Russia, from Chechnya, and sending them, and Sunni, by the way, sending them to Sunni areas and telling them that we are here to protect you. We are Sunni like you. They have like this. They have these skills that try to approach societies, but also they are really brutal and barbaric. I still remember going to the UN and visiting the what's called the convoy for Syria at the UN. I don't remember his name now. Dimostoro, I think, was, and we were talking about trying to negotiate or to tell the Russians just to give humanitarian corridors for Syrians and Aleppo just to leave. And unfortunately, at the time, we figured out like maybe Aleppo, that was where we discovered how broken the international community is, and how weak the international community is, because they completely destroyed the whole city. Even the historic city that was built thousands of years ago was destroyed, and they did not want any people to get alive out of that city. And this is one of the theories of Russians, that they connect with an authoritarian regimes like Bashar al-Assad in Syria. To an extent, in one of Bashar al-Assad's speeches, he said, like, it's okay that a lot of refugees are outside of Syria. It's okay that a lot of IDPs are outside of Syria. It's okay that a lot of people were killed. Now we have a homogeneous community. And this is the way that Russians think as well. And I am not surprised at all by what Alex said and mentioned, and what Russians actually said over and over again that they don't have any problem by killing half of Ukraine, or maybe all of Ukrainians. I'm just trying to give an approach about like why Ukraine and Syria are kind of alike. Syrians really started this revolution peacefully for freedom, and Ukrainians did the same back in 2004. And Ukrainians inspired the whole world back in 2004, including us in Syria and the Arab world. That inspired the whole Arab Spring as well. And this is a fact that is not being said yet and not being spoken about widely yet. But I think there will be a time that we will talk a lot about how the colored revolutions inspired us in the Arab world. And unfortunately, that it's really unfortunate, like to say that also the massacres in Bucha, in my neighborhood, in the Yarmouk camp, are just the same. My house was destroyed by a Russian airjet, actually. And it is unfortunate to say that the more Ukrainians will liberate in Ukraine, the more they will reveal and discover that Russians did really ugly massacres against Ukrainians.
Because I wanted to know what Nidal thought about the no-fly zone, if he has an opinion about it.
Oh yeah, of course. You know, like the no-fly zone was one of the first battles that Syrians had to fight in the United Nations and with Obama's administration back then, and actually the Turks were pushing very hard to enforce a no-fly zone in Syria, and the United States refused back then.
That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.